Jane Unchained Live Talk. I am so honored, privileged to have as a guest on Jane Unchained Live Talk today, the one and only Brooklyn Borough President, Eric Adams, who is the author of an incredible new book. It's called Healthy at Last. Obviously, there's an echo there. It reminds me of the famous words, free at last. Tell us about why you wrote this book and why you feel that it's a key to the African American community, in particular, regaining power through optimal health.
It is so important, and it's really a very transparent conversation around my personal health journey, something that's impacting so many Americans, if not human beings across the globe. I was experiencing type 2 diabetes. I learned after going to the doctor for severe stomach discomfort that turned out to be an ulcer. But I lost my sight in my left eye. I was losing it in my right. I had permanent nerve damage in my hands and feet that the doctor stated it could eventually lead to amputation. I was also had high blood pressure, high cholesterol, all of the symptoms that's part of an American diet. And after meeting some great doctors and going on a whole food, plant-based diet, taking meat out of my diet and other processed foods, I was able to reverse my vision loss in 3 weeks and able to reverse the nerve damage in my hands and feet and normalize my cholesterol, my blood pressure, and even the ulcer that I eventually had, I was able to replace as well.
There you are, looking fit as a fiddle. I believe that's right outside New York City Hall or some other major government building. Now, of course, we're a 501c3, so we don't get into endorsing candidates or any of that. We're here to talk to you about your new book. However, you are running for mayor of New York. New York obviously was the epicenter in the United States back in early spring of the coronavirus. It's done much better now in some of the months since. Congratulations to you. I'm here self-quarantining in Los Angeles, but when you consider that those with underlying conditions suffer the worst effects of coronavirus, including death, that also, and that minority communities are suffering the worst consequences statistically of the coronavirus, is this sort of a clarion call to, hey, read my book, get healthy, stop eating fast food, eat fruits, vegetables, nuts, and grains, which is what nature gave us. You know, if you don't eat a chicken, the chicken walks away. If you don't eat a piece of corn or a head of kale, it rots. So what would your message be during this time of crisis where more than 200,000 Americans have died? I was just watching a documentary. Tragically, I read or heard that 55,000 Americans died in Vietnam. We're 4 times that.
Right. So true. And when you really think about it, we've come in full circle with our knowledge base. Clearly, we are on this planet together, and I believe that we can't harm one without harming the other. And that's what my book is about, particularly with those who were impacted so severely around COVID-19. You were, based on where you live, based on your zip code or the part of the country you were in, and a lack of access to healthy food, you were more likely to be not only deal with some of the pre-existing conditions or comorbidities, but you were also over 90% of the people who were hospitalized had pre-existing conditions, and over 90% of the people who died from COVID-19 had pre-existing conditions. My book really shows people how to look at your life and take very simple but real steps of regaining control of your health. Your health plan does not belong to your doctors. They're part of your health team. You are in control of your body. You're in control of your life. And yes, healthy at last. is a play on both Dr. King's speech, Free at Last, and also a great song that one of our artists sang many years ago, At Last, When You Found the Love of Your Life. So it's about finally getting to the point that you should have the happiness that we all long for.
Wow. We are talking to Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams. He has a new book, and it's Healthy at Last. He describes his own personal journey from fast food junkie to super healthy Superman. Tell us about your personal journey, because you talk about in your book that you were hooked, like so many Americans, on fast food, which is packed with sugar, salt, and fat, three substances that we are biologically pre-programmed to crave to get us through times of famine, and have now resulted in 2/3 of Americans being overweight or obese, because the fast food companies know if we pack these three addictive substances into those meals, people are going to come back for more. That is the definition of addiction. One's too many, 1,000 isn't enough.
So that very well said, because what I experienced the first week when I was making the transformation, I felt like someone that was addicted to heroin. I would wake up in the middle of the night thinking and craving beyond belief. Just my palate needed to taste. And I'm sure if you were to do a study and show the impacts of people who are weaning off some form of narcotics and then weaning off the sugar, fat, and salt diet that we consume, you'll see almost the same withdrawal impact. But I was able to get through that first week. And I remember sitting down on a Sunday of the first week feeling woe is me. And I said to myself, Eric, change that woe is me to why not me? Why don't I lean into this wonderful world that's available for me? And why don't I explore it and enjoy it? And I started looking at the types of meals instead of focusing on what I couldn't eat. I started looking at the things I could start eating now. And I started looking at spices and learning how to cook meals, starting with one favorite meal, and so I can build up a repertoire. And now this journey has been an amazing journey. Not only do I feel better, look better, think better, clearer, but I'm also contributing to my mom, who was diabetic for 15 years, 7 years on insulin. She was, after 2 months going full plant-based, she cycled off her insulin. So I want to also help Mother, but also Mother Earth.
Now, you obviously have a tremendous impact on the people who are your constituents in Brooklyn. We know that these school kids, the habits are formed when they're kids. I personally believe one of the reasons why everybody's in such a rush, or not everybody, but certain people, to let's reopen the schools everywhere, no matter what, is because guess what? That's where the industry, the meat and dairy industry, force feeds the milk, the breast milk of cows, the cheese, in coordination with the government, when the vast majority of the kids drinking that are allergic to it. They are not intended to drink the breast milk of a cow, and it is resulting in everything from, well, obesity, because there are growth hormones in the cow's breast milk, since the breast milk of a cow is designed to get a cow who is, born at 60 pounds to hundreds of pounds in very short order. And so these kids are basically a captive audience in the schools, told, well, if you want to drink this, in some school districts, and I'm not referring to yours specifically, but in some school districts in the United States, you need a doctor's note in order to get plant-based milk. In order to get like healthy alternatives that are plant-based, you actually need a doctor's note to get this, even though the kids are allergic to the cow's milk. Have you been able to address this as somebody who's in a position of power as the Brooklyn Borough President?
Yes, and the Brooklyn Borough President, for those in California or other municipalities, it's the position of what you would probably consider a county executive. New York City has 5 counties. Brooklyn is the largest with 2.6 million people, extremely diverse. 47% of this municipality speak a language other than English at home. And I lay that out because we've always learned that it is the children that help families really understand a way of life or how to do things that are differently, smarter, and healthier in our cities. And when we don't use our school system effectively to give good quality information, we are just harming generations. And right now, we're not doing that. It's almost criminal what we're doing to our children who are suffering from childhood obesity, childhood asthma, childhood diabetes. And we're giving them school food every day that really feeds their crises. And so we have been moving towards getting the animal products out of our school, particularly the milk and the cheese. We have been successful in convincing the city to stop serving processed meat and purchasing processed meat in the cities. We move forward with a meatless Mondays in our public school system where we have over 1 million children. And we have been really looking at what we feed people, even in our correctional facilities, our hospitals, all the agencies. I'm a big believer. I cannot demand you to stop doing things, what's on your grill in your backyard. But darn it, we should not be feeding crisis with taxpayers' money and feeding the healthcare crisis that we are facing in this city, in this country.
So, do you get pushback from industry when you do this? It would be very interesting. I know you can't reveal anything. I don't want you to reveal something that's confidential, but when you're advocating for these kinds of reforms, for those who have not had that light bulb moment that, oh, wow, we're not cows. We shouldn't be drinking the breast milk of another species that's packed with growth hormones when we're dealing with an obesity crisis. Just that one thing. Do you get pushback, and how do you deal with it? Because we are having, tremendous growth as a movement. In the 100th percentiles, plant-based options are skyrocketing. I mean, just to mention right now, Beyond Meat stock is skyrocketing because it's going into some of America's major big box stores. And lest anyone say, well, that's not healthier. Well, it is zero cholesterol. Okay. And it's not packed with growth hormones. So we're not suggesting people eat it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner and snacks, but it's definitely better than eating, for example, processed meat that the World Health Organization has determined is cancer causing officially. So yes. What are some of the dialogues you have, and how do you navigate that space? Because so many people, while we're advocating this super healthy, plant-based whole food diet that would really, truly eliminate so many of our problems, the health crisis, we're in a zoonotic pandemic that jumped from animals to humans. So right there, but also the fact that 1 out of every 4 Americans prior to COVID was dying of heart disease, that processed meat is cancer causing, that red meat is a likely carcinogen, and that animal agriculture is a leading cause of climate change, habitat destruction, deforestation, wildlife extinction, and human world hunger, because animals are eating the vast majority of the food produced. How do you navigate that conversation when we have so many facts at our disposal, but yet you deal with an entrenched system that basically often does try to dismiss our rational arguments?
Well, I believe 2 things are important to point out. One, I want to touch on the Beyond Beef, Beyond Meat initiative. Some people would start out and say, well, maybe it's not as healthy as a complete plant-based diet. But what it is doing is changing the conversation, because this is an ocean liner that has been sailing down the wrong sea pathway. And when you start opening the door about we don't have to have meat at the center of our diet, then you're now going to open the door to other people trying new products, new tastes, lowering other aspects of the meat that we're producing. You're going to see newer versions of Beyond Meat and cheese and other products. So this is very exciting because now we've taken the conversation to mainstream. The second is the pushback that you talked about. We have to meet it head on. We have to be unapologetic about our families and raising healthy children and families. And that is what the book Healthy at Last is about, is pointing out how do we take control of our lives? How do we not allow other people to hijack the conversation of what we need to do so that we don't have to benchmark our lives about when we put our family members in some form of hospice, when do you go for your next surgery, when do you lose your sight, the 3 hours a day, 3 days a week, you're on kidney dialysis. That is not living, that's existing for people who believe they have to surrender the quality of life they're looking for. So I think you meet this argument head on, and you are unapologetic about saving our children and families.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I have to say that you are the living example because you're in clearly really optimal health when you go out there and you talk to the public and you try to spread this message. Do you feel that the world is changing? I mean, I feel the world is changing. I've been a vegan for 24 years when a former cattle rancher named Howard Lyman, who was the gentleman who appeared on Oprah and revealed the secret horrors of the cattle industry, walked into my studio. I was a local news anchor working out of Paramount Studios here in LA. And afterwards, he walked up and he said, "I hear you're a vegetarian." And I was. And he said, "Do you eat dairy?" And I kind of hung my head because, you know, he talked about the horrors that we inflict on these animals. He had talked to me about the dead piles, which is what you're looking at here, of the male calves that they don't need, or putting them in veal crates, ripping babies from their mothers. And I said, "Yeah, I eat dairy. I consume dairy." And he pointed his finger at my nose and he said, "Liquid meat." And that was the moment I went vegan. But boy, did I get blowback. That was 24 years ago. I was, basically ridiculed. You know what they say, first they laugh at you, then they get angry at you, then they join you. But I've seen huge transformation in that time. When you're out there talking to parents and kids and fellow politicians, are you getting more respect now for this dialogue, for your position, where instead of being sort of the kook, you're the person on the front lines of what is clearly not just a trend, but the future of food?
Yeah, so true. And it's very important. What you're saying is extremely important because we live in a universe now of influencers. People no longer get their opinions, their thoughts from the tabloids. They really get them from people that they looked at their lives and they may have carried the mantle for something that's totally different from the new topic. People knew me from my days of advocacy of police reform. I believed throughout my 22 years as a law enforcement officer that you can have safety and justice side by side, and I articulated that. So when it came time for me to talk about the devastation of food and how it impacts our health, people were willing to listen because they said, this is a person who has been true to how do we live safe with justice. And that is what we need. We need to focus on many of our influences, many people who are receiving and giving out information to the public at large. I'm encouraging them to be part of this conversation. As we talk about saving our planet through global warming, you can't have that conversation if you're not talking about our overconsumption of meat in this country. If we're talking about Black Lives Matter, you can't have that conversation if you're not dealing with the fact that the number of Black people who die from diabetes, heart disease, and other diseases. So it is time for us to be honest and truthful with the things that we're calling for, and the influencers can't do it based on what's popular. We must do it based on what's accurate and what is true.
Well, we know that we are correct on this. And as the famed social psychologist, Dr. Melanie Joy says, we have to stop apologizing for being right. But at the same time, she also says, from a psychological standpoint, if you come from a position of judgment and I'm up here and you're down here, people just get into resistance and defensiveness and denial. So you've been so effective. First of all, do you see that I assume you've been effective, but maybe you can elaborate on that. When look, the kids of Brooklyn, all right? And I have a friend, Cynthia King, who runs a dance studio in Brooklyn, who's my dear friend, and I believe you know her as well. And she works with these kids. She's plant-based. She wants them to be great athletes. She teaches them and their parents about plant-based and also about animal cruelty and the impact of animal agriculture on environmental racism, where these factory farms and these slaughterhouses, they're not on Park Avenue or in Rodeo Drive. They're in communities of color almost exclusively. And she really has changed her little community to the point where when I've gone covering protests, all her ballet students show up, Have you had that same impact? And do you see the African-American community connecting empowerment with taking back the power through food? Because follow the money. Imagine if all that fast food money that is spent by communities of color was taken away. That in itself would collapse a system that is making us, to quote a movie, fat, sick, and nearly dead. And by the way, there's another movie coming out that focuses on communities of color called They're Trying to Kill Us, the same vein. In essence, the argument is that every time you buy meat, dairy, and particularly fast food, but the entire industry, every time you put your dollar on that, you are empowering the forces that are oppressing you and exploiting you. And that, I think, is the key issue that if we could get to be accepted, it's almost like to say it's politically incorrect to eat fast food. That would be a cultural revolution.
And I believe that's where we're going. And I'm extremely excited about what I am seeing. We have to, instead of making wellness abnormal and becoming used to seeing unhealthy, when I was told I was diabetic, there was a part of me that said, well, Eric, you knew it was coming. You knew this was part of getting into your 50s. This was part of how life continues to evolve and just settle into your new norm. Because we have been programmed and lied to that as we get older, we're supposed to have debilitating chronic diseases. That is just so untrue. But again, as you indicated, we cannot talk down to people. No, we must meet people where they are and take them where they ought to be and do it in a compassionate, caring way as you would do to anyone that's addicted to some form of substance. We are all in America hooked, and we are substance abusers. So when we look down on someone who's dealing with alcoholism or narcotics, we need to look at ourselves as well, because we are unhooked to something that's no good for us, that is destroying us, and we can't stop doing every day, 3 times a day, or sometime even more, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so it is imperative to have a compassionate conversation, expose ourselves. That is what I wanted to do in the book, to let people know, yes, I may be the borough president of Brooklyn, but I'm an everyday citizen that struggled with abusing myself each time I ate an unhealthy meal. And I was doing something else. I was self-medicating myself. During those policing days, when I was witnessing the violence and I had a very traumatic experience, I reached for that processed food, that hamburger, that donut, that chocolate cake. It was a way of trying to really deal with some of the trauma that I was seeing. There's a reason they call it comfort food. But my book and some of the recipes, I wanted to show people you can find comfort in healthy food and feed your body with a healthy way to really deal with trauma that many of us don't think we could do.
Well, you're talking my language, because I'm a recovering alcoholic with 25 years of sobriety this past April. And I know that I had to hit bottom to wake up and see myself objectively. Do you see this pandemic? We only have a couple more minutes, so I want to hit one one or two other issues. Let's talk a little bit about the pandemic. And you are the Brooklyn Borough President, very powerful position. I mean, just Brooklyn alone would be a huge, huge city in and of itself. Now, there is something going on called Kaporos, which is very controversial. And basically, there's two controversies. One is the wet markets that exist in there's 80 of them in New York City. And given that this is a zoonotic pandemic that started, it jumped from animals to humans, likely a bat to a pangolin, and then first erupted or was spotted in the Wuhan wet market slaughterhouse. They say wet market, it's a slaughterhouse. There's 80 wet market slaughterhouses in New York City. And, I'm going to show you just a couple of images. We don't want to gross anybody out, but the images this is Kaporos happening, where it's a religious ceremony where chickens are swung and then they're killed. And it's some of the worst footage I've ever seen, to be honest with you. What's your take on what's happening with Kaporos, given that we're in a pandemic and that's happening out on the streets, and also the wet markets?
Our country we have always been extremely conscious of religious practices, and we try to find a balance. Someone had a religious practice of sacrificing human beings. We would not allow that to happen. And so I think it's imperative for us to address this in three ways. One, there should be real conversations with those communities that are currently carrying out the practice, and show that there are alternative ways to carry out the practice without using a living animal to do so, and really engage in a conversation to move people from that. Second, we must carry out the health practices. In far too many areas where you see this taking place, the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, they have been extremely slow and reluctant.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You're breaking up a little bit, but let me ask you about the wet markets. Perhaps if we just wrap up, we've got 3 minutes. So let me ask you a little bit about the wet markets. Yeah, and by the way, to your point, many rabbis have come out and issued letters saying use coins. And the vast majority, this is a very small segment, use coins instead of live chickens. So just wanted to point that out. But let's talk just very quickly about the wet markets.
Yes, and even in that area.
Guess what? There we go. I think our, there you go. Just hit me on the wet market.
Yes, the same conversation. Some of our practices that practice halal food. All right. Did I lose you? So it's imperative that we move our country into a place.
Go ahead. Just I know we've got to wrap up. We've got 2 minutes.
Yes. In the area of the wet markets, it's imperative that we move our country to a humane way.
All right. Well, you know what?
I think I lost you, but it seems like we got a lot covered.
No. Yeah, we did get a lot covered, and I really wanted to get that statement on the humane markets, on the wet slaughter markets, and your answer. So we're going to give it one more shot. We've got 1 more minute, then we'll let it go, or you'll have to have you back.
Yes. I was stating that it's imperative that we move to a more humane way to acknowledge our religious philosophies without endangering the lives of countless number of people. The wet markets clearly are showing that they're feeder pandemics, and here in the city and state, we're looking to address that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Eric Adams. What a delight. And I just want to put up your book one more time. We'll have to peek on either side of it. There we go. Healthy at Last. What a great book. I hope everybody gets it. Everybody watching, if you're already plant-based, this is an incredible gift to give people during this pandemic. Is it on Audible too? Could you hear it?
Yes, it is on Audible, as well
either
as
read it or listen to it. It's a great book. Thank you so much. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Take care.
Okay.